Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. Many of us, present company included, exist at the crossroads of life, stuck between the life we lead and the life we dream of. It's a place where the comfort of the familiar meets the yearning for something more, something that truly resonates with the essence of who we are and who we aspire to be. If you feel like I'm speaking directly to you at this moment, it's because I am. We all like to believe that our struggles are unique, that the hurdles we face are tailored exclusively to the contours of our individual lives. But while there may be variation in how we hold ourselves back, the players in the game remain the same. Fears, excuses, narratives, and habits are spectres that whisper words of doubt and hesitation, crafting invisible barriers that keep us stuck in a no man's land. In today's podcast, we'll be exploring the myriad ways that we become ensnared by our own thoughts, the stories we've etched into the marrow of our identity, and the habits that, like shadows, follow us more faithfully than we wish. Today's show is more than a conversation, it's a mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we often turn away from. My guest today is a guide through this introspective journey, shedding light on the subtle and not so subtle perceptions that hold us back from stepping into our full potential. Her book, Breaking Free, Stop Holding Back, Start Being You, Your Guide to Creating the Career and Life of Your Dreams, is a manifesto for all who have ever felt stifled by their own doubts or by the expectations of others. With her guidance, we are invited to challenge our limiting beliefs, to step boldly into the unknown, and to sculpt a life that not only meets the outer benchmarks of success, but also fulfills the inner criteria of joy, passion, and purpose. As we embark on this voyage of self-discovery together, let's embrace the possibility that in our vulnerabilities and struggles, we find not isolation, but the threads that connect us more deeply than we ever imagined. It's in acknowledging and addressing these shared challenges that we can begin to forge paths toward not just individual liberation, but collective transformation. So take a deep breath, pull the sheet off the mirror, and let's get into what holds us back with Shannon Talbot. Shannon, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I think it's really important for people listening to understand that you've had to walk the talk before you could talk the talk. So let's start with your journey from sort of highly successful woman in business to walking away from it all to help other people.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I think I kind of go back to 2008 was a really pivotal year for me. And that was the year, I'd been ambitious for since I was young. I pictured myself working in a tower, one of the big towers downtown Toronto or wherever it was, and sitting in, a fancy office and all of that. But, and I was, after school, I went right into banking. I got a really great job. I was one of the only Spanish speakers on the team. They flew me all over. It was awesome. And then in 2008, things started to change. So in 2008, I got married and I went and did my MBA. And that was the first time I assumed a new role. So I now became a wife. And I also, with that, took a leave of absence from work to go do my MBA and then was reliant on my husband's income, which was not anything I'd ever pictured. For me, I always pictured working, even, after having kids and everything. So I all of a sudden was like, uh-oh. I reverted back to the 1950s and I told myself I'm now a housewife in a way. And now I need to act a certain way. I need to cook. I need to sew. I need to do all these things I don't like doing. So that's when things started to change. And then shortly after that, I became a people manager. Later after that, I became a mom. And with each new title, I started to tell myself, oh, you have to act a certain way and you have to be a certain way. And I started holding pieces of myself back, more so at work than at home, but just wasn't my, full authentic self. And I also had never really learned to manage my stress or my anxiety at work. So I did really well. I moved up the corporate ladder. I had really great jobs. I led teams and had great experience. But I hid my stress and my struggles a lot of the time because I didn't think I could share them. And then fast forward to a few years ago, I was pushing my then 5-year-old on a swing in a park in January, cold January lunchtime. And he turned to me and he said, "Mommy, can I give you a goal for this year?" And I was really excited. And I was taking my coaching certifications at the time on the side. Well, now I'd moved into advertising. I said, "Yeah, bud, give me a goal. What's your goal for me for this year?" And he said, "Mommy, can I give you a goal to be less angry? Because you are angry all the time."
Ouch. I felt that when you said that in the book, I felt that so deeply because I mean, there was definitely a time that I was very much like that as well. And it's because we're so overwhelmed, I think, with being of all these roles, like you were saying, you're a successful businesswoman, then you're a wife, then you're a mother, and these roles just pile on and they all come with a massive amount of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we do it to ourselves, right? Like
Yeah, for sure.
my husband wasn't saying, "Oh, you need to cook dinner 5 days a week." Like, no, he was happy to cook dinner. But I think the other thing we do as women is then I had self-inflicted guilt, right? So it was like, "Oh, I'm not cooking dinner." But then I feel guilty for not cooking dinner, all those things. And it was hearing this goal from my son who I was expecting him to say like, "I challenge you to 20 push-ups" or something. Like I did not expect that goal to come out
Take
of
me
his
to
mouth.
Disney.
Yes. Can you save up money? So it was what I needed to hear in that moment because I had actually gone to do my MBA. At this point, I think it was 12 years prior. I don't know, but more than 10 years ago because I wanted to change industries. I wanted to leave banking. I wanted to try something new. And even a few years before that, I'd set a goal that I realized after working with a coach, like that what set me on fire was one day I wanted to have my own business and help women live healthier, happier, and more fulfilling lives. But then, I kept finding, I have to do this first, or I need to learn more about this first, or, all those excuses we make. And it was hearing my son ask that question that, was the push I needed to say, okay, enough is enough. It is time to, as I call, chase my happy and pursue the career that I really want to do and where I can make more of a difference. And that was what set me off. A few months later, I gave my notice at work and then I left about 3 years ago now to start my own speaking and coaching business.
And you get deeply personal.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So why did you feel it was so important to share these stories with readers? Like, did you have any reservations, particularly when it came to sharing the story about your brother? I felt the pain in that story. Did you have any reservations about sharing these things with people?
So I hate admitting this, but when I was in the corporate world, I was like, you can't be vulnerable. You can't share really personal stuff. You have to put on this act. Not to say I wouldn't, once I had trust and things with that, I would open up to bosses and coworkers and things like that. Like when I struggled with infertility and things like that, I would eventually open up about. But for me, I think the thing was, and I've had amazing leaders and mentors and people in my life, but I didn't have enough of the messy, as I call it. I didn't have enough of people standing up and saying, it's really hard. Like, it's hard to balance motherhood with ambition, or it's hard to have a marriage with young kids, or it's hard to rise the corporate ranks and still be happy or look after yourself. And I didn't really have those, there's a few here and there, but it wasn't common for me to hear vulnerable stories from leaders or from other, I like to say everyday people, because celebrities, are really great, especially in their tell-all books. I love those and they're really great to learn from. But for me, I was like, no, I want the more everyday person to be sharing their struggles. And I want to learn from that. And so that's why I felt it was really important to open up and share. And then interestingly, the story I shared about my brother, that was really hard. I really didn't think my family was going to let me share it. My family is pretty private. I come from a very small town where everyone knows everybody. And so I knew by sharing the story, it would, although people knew about it, but it would get out there. And then, there's the fear of judgment. But at the same time, it's like the only way we are going to feel, less alone at times and understand that, everyone's going through something is when we can share these tough stories.
Yeah, and I think that's really what's so important about this book, actually. I've had it for a few weeks now, and I people can't see this, but as I've shown you, I've got it highlighted and sticky notes everywhere throughout it. Yeah, I loved it, and I think it's those personal anecdotes that make it very relatable for people. So the book is divided into sort of what holds us back and what sets us free. And for the purposes of today's podcast, I thought we would really just focus on what sets us back, because I think we all like to think we're these very unique individuals with unique challenges. And what's holding me back is way bigger than what's holding you back. We tend to think that way. And it really struck me as I was reading through these things that hold us back, that this is so common for just about everybody. And we're really not as unique as we like to think we are.
Yeah.
So as you say, let's cut through the bullshit.
Yep.
And get into sort of what is holding us back. So you have an interesting question that you ask yourself when you're afraid. And I loved it because I actually ask myself that question all the time. So can you maybe share what that is?
Sure. So I ask myself, what is the worst case that can happen? Sorry. I ask myself, will I die from doing this? Because I asked myself, so it started with an exercise actually based on serial entrepreneur and author Tim Ferriss, who says we have to define our fears before we'll ever reach our goals. And so I started asking myself, what is the worst case that can happen? But that wasn't enough for me. Like I needed what was the bar that I was not willing to cross? And for me, it's death. Some people it's other things, but for me, I was like, you know what? I'm okay with some risk as long as it doesn't involve me potentially dying. Like I will never skydive because it terrifies me. So now my question is, will I die from doing this? Will I die from public speaking? Will I die from raising my hand in a meeting? Will I die from asking somebody I don't know out for coffee? Those types of things. And usually the answer is no. So then there's nothing holding me back from doing it.
I love that. And when I was reading it, I was laughing a little bit because I kind of have the same question, but I will skydive. So my question is a little bit like, statistically, what are the odds I'm going to die when I do this?
Yeah.
So a little bit different, but the same sort of, this is probably not going to kill me. So I think I'm going to do it anyway. And I really love that, because fear is real for people, and it can be, I might feel that somebody else's fear is quite small, but it will be the most monumental thing to them that is holding them back. And it's identifying those fears, but I don't think a lot of people know how to identify them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I share another story in the book that I won't, share all the details here, but, I never realized I had a fear of loss until, as we mentioned, I shared the story about my family and my brother, and how it impacted my parenting. And I didn't know until my son was 5, my oldest son was 5. Things happen when my kids are 5 for some reason that really impact my life. But when my oldest son was 5, it triggered 5-year-old Shannon who had this scenario happen where my brother had to leave our house and he couldn't live with us anymore. And just the beliefs I formed back then about parenthood, I never thought about. And it took a therapist in just one session, which was mind blowing. In one session with a therapist, she connected the dots. And I was able to realize, okay, this is why I have this fear in my parenting. And it stems back to when I was 5. And, we all have blind spots and it's scary to confront them, right? I know some people, it's like opening a can of worms. But if we're willing to do it and face the hard things, we can end up even better on the other side and more free on the other side.
And so fear is sort of the biggest F word you have in your book, and you sort of break it down. We have fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, fear of failure. But the one that I thought was really interesting was fear of success. What does that look like?
Yeah. So fear of success is one I think we don't really talk about or we don't think about. And fear of success is when we might, self-sabotage a little bit, but perhaps without realizing we're doing it, or we make up excuses as to why we're doing it. And it's so that we don't then have to follow through. So I'll give some examples because I know it's a bit weird maybe to hear this fear of success. So, if you're in sales and you go out and get a client, okay, well, once the client says yes, that's when the work starts. That's when you have to prove that you're worth the sale, right? So it's like, ooh, that's scary. Or if you go for a promotion, there's sometimes like a thrill in the chase. And sometimes we may hold pieces of ourselves back because, if I get the promotion, then I actually have to do the job. And what if I'm not qualified for the job? Or what if, they think, I shouldn't have gotten the job. So we hold ourselves back, or we just do little things, we tell ourselves we're going for it, but we're not fully going for it because then we have that fear of, all the other fears come into play when we do get the job or the role or the gig or whatever that looks like, because then we're actually having to do the work.
Hi, I'm Steve Yerko.
And I'm Tara Sands. Now available from Maji Media is our new podcast, 4 Kids Flashback. 4 Kids is the company who brought you the English dub of Pokemon in the late 90s and so many other shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kirby, the infamous One Piece dub, and so many more.
We'll be talking to the people who worked at 4 Kids. Actors, directors, writers, editors, producers, engineers, you get the point. And hopefully get the answers to questions both you and I have about the company.
I actually worked there as a voice actor on some of the shows.
And I was a kid watching the shows and remember way more than Tara does.
And thank God for that. Steve is actually a professional storyboard artist, which gives some really unique insights into anime and animation. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts. That's the number 4 Kids Flashback.
I think what struck me about that was I think most people will understand this when they read it. But I think before they actually sort of address that fear of success, they will attribute their fear to other things before they understand that it's actually success that they're afraid of.
Yeah.
I think that because we just don't think of being afraid of that.
No.
Being afraid of having money. Being afraid of being happy, because it involves work. So I really love that part of that. And one of the other things you shared, you move from fear, you sort of address, and the other one is fear of loss, which you explain brilliantly with your family, obviously. And then the other one you talk about are excuses. And you shared a statistic that the average person makes 2,190 excuses to validate their decisions every year. So roughly 6 excuses a day. That would really hit me. And so I started to really pay attention to that as I was reading this. And it was crazy because I was like, what I would notice, I'm not going to work out today. What excuses was I giving myself? And I was really starting to pay attention to that. What are some of the common excuses that we rely on?
Yeah. So, and it's funny, I'm hearing a lot of people reading that chapter, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize. Same thing. Like, oh, I didn't realize how often I justify why I don't want to do something. So the common excuses tend to be, I have no time. I think that's number one, right? We're always busy. We are very excellent at being busy. So not having time. The one that I still laugh at for not exercising was, I was like, I don't have the energy to exercise. And it's like, duh, why do you think people exercise? But I said that for years. I said, I don't have the energy. I don't have money is another really, really big one. But then if we look at it, we might say we don't have money to do something that's really going to help improve our lives or our health or whatever that is. But then we'll easily go out for a nice dinner with friends or buy a new pair of jeans or whatever that looks like. So I don't have money. I don't know how is another really big one, especially with women, waiting until we know how to do something before trying it. So those are really the big ones that tend to hold us back.
Yeah, I think now I can't recall if I read it in the book or not, but I think it was in the book that you said, women will not apply for a job.
Yeah.
Until they don't have 100%.
Yes.
Crazy to me.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah. And so what is the statistic for men? Is it 70?
60.
Men will apply if they have like 60%?
60. Yeah.
So be more like men. Be more
so
like men.
It's funny. With my coaching clients. Yeah. With my coaching clients, I'm like, forget if you check all the boxes on a job description. Like, it's not your job to qualify yourself for a role. Like, somebody's paid to do that. So go for things and let somebody do their job to either qualify you or disqualify you, but don't do it before somebody else can.
Yeah. And what's the harm with being disqualified from the job? I mean, what's the worst that could happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to die? No.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think that opportunity to get yourself out there too, somebody might look at your resume and see something that they didn't realize they wanted in that role.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes fit too. Fit's a hard one to put on paper, right? So I think you never know what you're going to connect with somebody on. And that can outweigh your experience if they can tell you're going to be a quick learner and you have the right attitude and all of that. So yeah, my advice is go for things. Like, just go for them. If it's something you want, go for it. And then whatever happens will happen.
Okay. So the next one we sort of jump into is the stories we tell ourselves. And this was a very interesting chapter to me. And again, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about in the beginning about, you suddenly became a wife and a mom and a business person. And we have all these labels that we attach. And then we developed a narrative around them that we just continually tell ourselves. So how do we break free of that or identify that it's a story and not necessarily a reality?
So the question I like to hear too, and my dad's a lawyer, so I grew up with, and I worked in his law firm for years. So I grew up with that. But I like to say, anytime you're telling yourself, ask yourself, is this fact or fiction? And a way to distinguish that is, would this hold up in a court of law? Like if someone is on trial for saying, I don't know, I'm not smart enough, how is that going to be proved? Can it be proved in a court of law? Right. Probably not, right? So it's calling out again our bullshit again on the stories we tell ourselves. And an exercise I do here with my clients, which is it's really hard to do, but it's really important, is I ask them to write down everything that they tell themselves on a daily basis. And the hard things, right? The hard things they don't want to admit, but I have them write it down. And, it's sometimes, unfortunately, I hear too often, I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. That's one I hear a lot, which is really hard to hear. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm too fat. All of these things, from starting in the morning, when you first look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, what are those things you see? Like my roots need to be done, like we go to the negative. We look at what are all those things we need to do or should have done or need to change. I have them write them all down on a piece of paper. And then I have them picture somebody they love. And if they have a child in their life around age 10 to 12, that's ideal, or a niece or nephew or somebody. And I have them picture them. And then I say, now say your list out loud as if you're telling them those things.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I can't. I'm like, why not? Well, it's so mean. Like, yeah, we are so mean to ourselves on a daily basis all the time. And we're never going to fix it, right? We're never going to only have positive thoughts because we're human and that's impossible. Yeah. We don't want to strive for impossible. But the more we can start to at least acknowledge it and have that awareness where, oh, okay, this is me being really mean to myself again, and just tell ourselves to shut up. Then we can, that's the first step, is really just realizing it. It's just our minds. It's not true. And there's just stories that we have told ourselves.
It's funny you said that. You reminded me of this part in the book where you say, did you know that we have an estimated 60,000 thoughts a day, 80% of which are negative, and 95% that are exactly the same as the day before? Like, we're just in Groundhog Day.
Yeah, we are.
Perpetually with our thoughts, aren't we? And breaking free from that is hard. And I think a lot of times you can hear the same message over and over again, but sometimes it's just presented in a different way that it strikes you. And this morning I was lying in bed and I was mad at myself that I'd overslept, and I started to beat myself up. And I stopped myself sort of mid thought, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I need sleep. It's okay that I did that, right? But until you actually start to really be aware of those thoughts, they will take over your life, I think.
They will. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what we're trying to break. So, so let's get to the big one, because this is the one I think is going to trip everybody up. And because we all have it, it's bad habits. And from personal experience, I know that habits can be broken. But I also know that as you're doing them, it's really easy to revert. Like, as you're trying to break them, it's really easy to revert back to it. Why is that?
So our brains don't like change. So, they're okay with it at the start. At the start, it's exciting, which is why, New Year's resolutions in January, people are great usually for the first couple of weeks. But our brains then freak out because they're like, oh my gosh, like, oh, Candace, you're changing, or Shannon, you're changing. You're not supposed to change. I'm supposed to keep you safe and secure and all of that. So then we start to self-sabotage. And we start to, again, go back to justifying, or giving the excuses as to why we can't do something or all of that. And that is why it's so hard. Change is uncomfortable. Change is hard. It feels worse before it gets better. And so we don't like to feel that, right? We don't want to feel this uncomfortableness, and our bad habits make us feel good, and we want to do what feels pleasurable. So often, rather than stick it through, we give up right before we break through, and we go back to our bad habits. And I liken it to, I've been saying this more and more in my talks lately, it's like a house renovation. And it's interesting. I did a talk a couple weeks ago, and I asked people, I said, what's the first step in a house renovation? Whether it's a room, a house, whatever. And it was funny, the group went, demolition. I'm like, no, that's not the first step. What's the first step? It's a vision, right? You have the vision, you have an idea, you have, a goal, right? Make the kitchen look nicer, whatever that is. Well, then what comes next? Then the demolition comes, right? The mess, the potentially things costing more money, things taking more time, you having to move out or wash your dishes in the bathtub or whatever that looks like. So the renovation piece is really, really messy. And that is the same for transformation, right? Any type of habit change, it's messy, it's uncomfortable. We're learning it as we do it. We may need to tweak things, but we're going to push through in a renovation, right? We're going to keep going because it's worth the end goal. And that's the way we have to start thinking of our habits is, it's the house renovation. It's the really part of a messy house renovation that we have to get through to get out the other side.
And do you think too, though, that there's this when we tend to change our behavior, we make people around us uncomfortable. Do you think that holds us back as well?
I do. Yeah, I do. And I think too, it's a great point. It's finding the right people that will support you. So it's, if my husband, for example, will be like, you should go for a run today. Like a run would make you feel really good today. But in the past,
and are you instantly like, don't tell me what to do?
You know what? Yesterday I was like, I'm still not going. I didn't go. I need to get back on the exercise wagon. I've all accidentally fallen off, but it's funny. But he used to say, but I had to have a conversation with him because he's way better at exercising than I am, which is motivating. But he used to say to me, like, I'd be like, oh, I don't want to go for a run. And he'd be like, then don't. And finally I had to say, no, don't tell me not to. Because I need motivation. So it's finding the people, right? It's like sometimes people are going to say what they think we want us to hear, which only makes things worse and helps us justify our bad habits. And sometimes too, the people we're surrounding ourselves with aren't aligned with the direction we want to go in. And that's a harder one because that could mean spending less time with them or perhaps finding a new group or different people to spend more time with. And that's tricky.
One of the things you talk about, and I know your book is for everyone, it's not just for women, but this is what she said. So please focus on women for just a minute. One of the things you talk about is people pleasing, which I think is something women are socialized, raised to do from such a young age. And it's a really hard one to break. Mm-hmm. Any tips for that, for breaking free of that people pleasing that we've been conditioned for?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. So one is, if you're always saying yes to somebody else, it's a no to yourself or it's a no to, perhaps one of your priorities. So as uncomfortable as it is, and it usually goes back to the stories we tell ourselves, we usually people please because of fear or beliefs we have. So we fear disappointing people or we fear letting people down. Or we just think we need to be helpful, like we're raised to be helpful and say yes. So the more we can reframe those stories and start to tell ourselves, no, you know what? By saying no to that, I'm going to have more energy or more time for myself or for my family. I'll be a better wife. I'll be a better mom. I'll be a better leader. The more we can just realize what the opposite will do for us and set those priorities accordingly, the better. And I even heard it last week in one of my talks. So, I asked the group to set their 5 priorities and they did. And I asked them, how many of you made it on your list of priorities?
Oh, interesting.
And this was an interesting one. The men all made it on their list. The women, and it wasn't 100%. I don't want to, blanket it, but the women, a few of them were like, I made it on my list, but I'm the first one to go off my list if something else comes along. So I think that's the thing we need to stop, right? We need to stop deprioritizing ourselves and realize by prioritizing yourself, what are the benefits that's going to bring either to you or to your family or to your work or whatever that is. That's one of the big ones to stop people pleasing.
Yeah, I think women will struggle with that one a lot. Yes. So very, very helpful. I think I've read probably every self-help book out there. Even if it doesn't completely speak to me, I always sort of pick out something that is useful. And you mentioned a couple of books or of things that you've read that really spoke to you. What was the most impactful for you along the way?
For me, it was Becoming by Michelle Obama. Was one. I have two, but yeah, Becoming by Michelle Obama and then The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. Those 2 books dramatically changed my life. And Becoming, it's interesting. My oldest spent 31 days at Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto 5 years ago. And while I was there, one of my friends, knew I was, looking for books to read and things like that. And she said, she and I, funny enough, met at a fertility clinic, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you have to read Becoming. Michelle talks about her struggle with fertility." And so I texted my husband, I'm like, "On your way here tonight to the hospital, please get me Becoming and bring it." So he brought it to me. And it was interesting because I was like ready to read that part of the book. And then what ended up sticking out to me was Michelle shared her story, how she was this very successful corporate lawyer, but it didn't bring her joy and fulfillment. And so she decided to change careers and move into healthcare, which paid less money, but just brought her more joy. And that was the green light I think I needed to grant myself permission to start to dream about other jobs and other ways of living my life. So that was one of the big ones for me that granted that permission. And then the second one, Robin Sharma, the 5 a.m. Club. This is how I finally broke my bad habits that we were just talking about is, and it's funny, it took me years I'd heard about it. It took me years to finally agree to read it because I thought it was a ridiculous concept. But it was you wake up at 5 a.m. and from 5 to 6, no one's trying to bug you. Your phone's not ringing. Nothing's happening. And you have 60 minutes to focus on mindfulness, on learning, and on exercise. And it's 4 years now that I started that habit. And that is what I really credit being able to finally prioritize my well-being with, was starting that morning routine.
All right. I have to say, I have not read either of those. So
Okay.
I'm going to add them to my list. So that's good. So let's talk then a little bit, because we discussed, what is holding us back. How does your book help people move past those things and then into being set free? And, the title of the book, obviously, Breaking Free.
Yeah. So the book, the third and fourth section, so the third section of the book is what sets us free. And it basically addresses all of the things that hold us back and more. And through stories of myself and other inspirational women that I've included, plus really practical step-by-step exercises that for any of you who are going to read the book, I really encourage you to do, even if they feel silly or, time-consuming, they can really help you break free. So there's a whole bunch of exercises around, dropping the guilt, asking for what you want, creating new, healthier habits, quitting, as I call the 3 Ps, which are people pleasing, being a perfectionist, and caring so much about what others think, which is another thing we do too much of. So lots of really great exercises in there. And then as well, the end section is around what keeps us going. So change is hard and sustaining change is even harder. So it's, got some tips and stories and strategies on how to get, back on the horse when you fall off and how to keep going, and just really how you can break free and live the life that will bring you more joy and energy and purpose.
You also privately coach people.
I do, yeah.
As well. So I'm wondering if you have a story that you could share without naming names that maybe would walk us through sort of that beginning of, identifying what's holding back and the breaking free part that you're most proud of.
I coach a lot of women on confidence and then as well burnout, right? Because we're trying to juggle so many things at once. And I think one of my favorite stories is this woman who she was going back, transition after maternity leave, her second maternity leave. She works in a very male-dominated industry. And she'd been off with her kids during COVID. So much had changed really. And then she was going back into the office. And she's kind of at this middle level where the senior people are all quite older than her and all had nannies and things to help raise kids. And then the junior people don't have kids, aren't married, So she's kind of in this middle spot. So she doesn't have the peers necessarily to lean on. And one of the first exercises I did with her was, okay, what does success look like to you in the next 6 months? You're just going back. You have a 1-year-old, you have a 3-year-old, you're in the office 4 days a week, which is a lot as well. What does success look like? And her answer, the first bullet of her answer was to know everyone and everything in my industry since I've been away. So we go through and I reread her definition of success. And she hears it. And immediately she goes, oh my gosh, like that is so ridiculous. I'm like, yes, it is. And she was setting herself up, like basically setting herself up for failure, right? Because she'd go in, in 6 months' time, if she didn't meet that, she'd feel like a failure. So we had to redefine success for her. And then, we did practical steps. Like I do a fears exercise with all of my clients where we go through all the fears and like, what's the worst case that can happen? What's that bar? What's the question you're going to ask yourself? And it was so amazing the third piece we really had to work on with her was caring less what other people thought, because she wants to be a great mom. She wants to have balance, and that's not a norm in her industry. So we basically had to work together and basically phrased to her as, what role model might you be then for the younger generation? If there's no leaders like this in your company today, what leader are you going to be and who might you inspire? And that, I think, was just helped propel her forward. She went on, she was picked as one of the top leaders in her company. She was flown to the States to help moderate a panel. She actually just shared with me a couple of weeks ago, she got her biggest bonus she has ever gotten last year. And interestingly, when I asked her what she was most proud of or what she can look back on last year and look at, and she's super high achiever with set really high expectations. And it took her time, and she came back to me in the end and she said, you know what? I survived. And I'm just going to be proud at that. She goes, I always set really big goals and stuff. And yeah, I hit stuff, but she goes, but I'm most proud of that I survived. Like I made it back from mat leave. I got home to eat dinner with my kids. And, it was more the small moments that she wanted to savor versus the big things that aren't going to happen all the time. So it was really, she's phenomenal. She's, really, really incredible person. And
I love that. And there was one part in the book that kind of struck me. It was about, write your own eulogy.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, yeah, what do I want that to look like? Right. And I think that's a real eye opener when you think, what are people going to say about you when you're gone? What do you want them to say? And that's a big one. I think that is a really good exercise to do is to sit down and think about that. So what's next for you? Now, you've got the book, you're out coaching, you're doing public speaking everywhere. What's your next goal?
So my next goal is, I've already started writing my next book and switching my topics a little bit into chasing happiness. And I really want to help people find greater happiness, but in the everyday, right? Because that's the thing. We go for these big highs and lows and that's great, but I want to really help people find happiness in the smaller moments, in the everyday, through my speaking, coaching, and then as well the next book that I'm working on.
I'm curious, that chasing happiness, is that definition of it changed for you post-pandemic?
Oh, yeah.
Like, do you think that would have been a different message? Yeah, because I think a lot of us have really had time to reevaluate what that means to us. So would that have been a totally different book prior to 2020? I'm curious.
Oh, 100%. And even it's funny, I still have, I have a strategist I work with on my business now who still needs to rein me in, because for years I tied happiness to, and it's horrible to admit, but to title and money.
Yeah.
And the thing is, for me, I'd get that promotion or I'd get that raise or I'd get the big bonus and I'd be happy for a couple of weeks. And then it's like, okay, now what's next? Right. And it was like you're constantly chasing it. So yeah, for me, happiness now, it has to, involve my family, my friends, my environment, nature. It's just so much more encompassing now of what brings me happiness than money and status and titles.
Well, I can't wait to read it. So I want an advance copy of that one, Shannon, so we can have you back. But in the meantime, where can people connect with you, find your book, and follow along on social media?
Sure. So you can connect with me you can go to my website, which is shannontalbot.com. There is a link there to buy my book, or my book is available on Amazon, Breaking Free, Stop Holding Back, Start Being You. I post a lot on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. And on Instagram, I'm Shannon Talbot _coaching.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Shannon.
Thanks so much for having me, Candace.
If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves and remember, your voice matters.
Come on a journey like no other, where you will discover many roads that will lead you to a happier, healthier, and more stress-free life. And the beauty is, you don't need any vacation time for this adventure. The journey will come to you. Join Avery Rich on your very own journey into yoga. Along the way, she will demystify yoga poses and guide you into a yoga posture or short sequence, all in less than 15 minutes. You have nothing to lose but stress. The Journey into Yoga podcast. It's not for people who like yoga, it's for people who don't like yoga. Follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or at averyrich.com.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.